Before we dive in, if you've ever felt alone, misunderstood, or like no one could possibly get what you're going through, this story is for you. So hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and drop a comment below about how it made you feel. Let's talk about what most people are too afraid to say out loud. You think it could never be you. That certain lines are carved in stone, unshakable, unbreakable. But what happens when grief crashes into desire? When loneliness stretches so wide, so deep, that even the most forbidden thoughts begin to whisper in your ear? I never saw myself as the kind of woman you'd find in an infidelity story. I certainly didn't expect to live a real-life cheating story that feels ripped from Reddit. But after my husband died, everything inside me went still until my nephew moved in. And with him came an emotional storm I never saw coming. That's where everything began to shift. This isn't just a tale of infidelity and cheating. It's a raw, uncomfortable, and deeply human confession of infidelity. A forbidden connection born not from lust, but from sorrow. A cheating story that unfolded in silence, in glances, in grief. And as you listen, I ask you, what would you have done in my place? There's a kind of silence that isn't just quiet, it screams. That's what my nights became after David passed. I'd lie in our bed, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the echo of laughter that once filled these walls. Infidelity wasn't even a concept in my world back then. All I knew was loss. And when grief grips you like that, you don't see anything else. It consumes you, like a storm that refuses to end. I wasn't expecting Ryan to move in. My sister's son, broken from a betrayal of his own, a cheating story he barely spoke about. It was almost poetic, how two people devastated by love's aftermath ended up under the same roof. There was no plan, no purpose, just two souls, raw and unguarded, trying to breathe again. And in that house full of memories, we quietly learned how to share space without breaking each other. Grief changes your rhythm. Nights stretch longer, and morning feels heavier. I started noticing how Ryan's footsteps moved around the house at odd hours, just like mine. He never talked much, but when he did, there was always a shadow behind his words, a whisper of some forbidden confession he wasn't ready to speak. We didn't talk about our pain directly, but somehow we felt it together. The kind of shared sorrow that makes silence almost sacred. And one night, as I sat on the couch with an untouched cup of tea, he quietly joined me. We didn't exchange many words, just a glance here, a small nod there, and something shifted. Not in a loud or obvious way, but like the first crack in a frozen lake. That was the night everything began to change, even if neither of us admitted it out loud. That night, the remote ended up in my hand, and without much thought, I played one of those old romantic films, one David and I used to watch. I expected tears, maybe some kind of emotional collapse. But instead, Ryan sat beside me, silently, as if he knew that I didn't want to be alone. The scenes unfolded slowly, and I realized how long it had been since someone just sat with me. No judgment. No questions, just presence. I could feel the tension, though no words were spoken. Our shoulders barely touched, yet it felt electric. I don't know if it was the wine, the dim light, or simply the ache of two lonely people craving warmth, but something intangible hovered between us. A weightless thread pulling us closer, not physically, but emotionally. I kept telling myself it was innocent, but deep down I knew better. You don't need physical touch to cheat. Emotional cheating can begin with a glance, a sigh, or the way someone says your name. That night was the beginning of a confession of cheating neither of us dared to say out loud. I saw it in his eyes, the same hunger that stared back at me in the mirror each day. Not for sex or affection, but to feel alive again, to matter, to be wanted. We sat in silence, both pretending we were watching the movie, but the real story was playing between us. It was a forbidden confession unfolding in real time. Not a word said, yet everything was being spoken. And I started to wonder, when does emotional closeness start to blur the lines? When does companionship quietly turn into something more, something you can't ignore? It's strange how the smallest gestures can carry the heaviest meaning. A casual brush of the hand, a glance held just a second too long. It all builds like pressure behind a dam. That night, I felt it more than ever. Every time Ryan looked at me, I felt exposed, like he could see the ache behind my smile. And when our shoulders touched again, it wasn't by accident. Not anymore. It was deliberate, quiet, but intentional. We didn't speak about it. That's the thing with forbidden confessions. You don't voice them. They live in your breath, in your heartbeat, in the silence between sentences. There was no affair yet, no act of infidelity to point to. But I could feel the betrayal building in my body, not toward David, but toward the woman I used to be. The woman who swore she'd never feel something like this again. The guilt hit me in waves. Every small interaction with Ryan became a question of morality. Was this cheating? Was I already too far gone? Infidelity isn't always loud. Sometimes it's soft. It whispers through a gaze, through shared laughter that lasts too long, through moments that feel more intimate than they should. I started to dread these encounters as much as I longed for them. And still, I didn't stop it. Maybe I didn't want to. Maybe I needed to feel that thrill again, even if it came wrapped in shame. Ryan didn't pull away either. That unspoken connection grew heavier, like a truth pressing down on both of us. And in the quiet tension of the days that followed, the universe found a way to push us even closer, without either of us asking for it. That afternoon, I sat at the piano for the first time in months. My fingers trembled as they hovered above the keys, but muscle memory took over. Each note I played was a release of pain, of longing, of everything I'd kept bottled up since David's passing. Music had always been my escape, my silent therapy. And in that moment, I wasn't a grieving widow. I was just me, whole if only for a few minutes. What I didn't expect was for Ryan to be listening. He appeared quietly in the doorway, his eyes soft, his presence calm. He didn't speak right away. But when the final chord faded into the room, he said, "That was the best birthday gift I've ever gotten." I smiled, genuinely, maybe for the first time in ages. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Like I mattered. Like I still had something to give. And that was the moment things truly shifted. His words didn't feel like flattery. They felt like a confession of infidelity against the sadness we both carried. Like we were cheating on our own grief, daring to let a little joy slip in. I hadn't even known it was his birthday. Yet somehow, my music reached him in ways no gift ever could. It wasn't just a song. It was connection. I saw it in his face, the way he looked at me after that. There was something new in his eyes. Tenderness mixed with yearning. We didn't touch. We didn't speak of what we both felt. But that moment opened a door neither of us could close again. And as the day turned into evening, that energy, that unspoken electricity between us, only intensified, waiting for something, anything, to set it free. It started so innocently. A small cake, a cheap bottle of wine, and the quiet idea of giving Ryan a moment of joy. I didn't have grand plans for a birthday celebration, but somehow it became more than just a gesture. As we laughed over old stories and clinked glasses, something inside me softened. The air between us was warmer, lighter, even healing. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't drowning in grief. We sat on the floor, plates half full, wine glasses in hand. His laugh was unguarded, his stories vulnerable. And as the hours passed, the layers between us began to peel away. We weren't aunt and nephew in that moment. We were two broken people, stitched together by shared pain and quiet hope. That night wasn't about infidelity or betrayal. It was about feeling seen, feeling human again. But vulnerability has a way of opening doors you didn't know were there. With each glass of wine, our conversations grew deeper about love lost, the people who hurt us, the emptiness that never quite leaves. His eyes never left mine, and mine, well, I stopped trying to look away. The line between comfort and intimacy blurred, and I felt it, the slow, undeniable shift into forbidden territory. There was a pause. A silence that stretched between us after a shared laugh. Our hands brushed, this time without pretense. I looked at him. He looked at me. And in that suspended moment, I realized there was no turning back. We were standing at the edge of something powerful, something dangerous. And it was only a matter of time before one of us made the first move. It happened by the piano, where so much had already been said without words. I don't remember who leaned in first. Maybe it didn't matter. The kiss wasn't rushed or frantic. It was slow, deliberate, almost reverent. A confession of infidelity spoken through lips, not language. It wasn't just passion. It was the ache of two people finally giving in to something they had tried so hard to deny. And once that line was crossed, nothing was ever the same. Our bodies moved with hesitation, but our hearts, they surged. Each touch felt like a release of everything we'd suppressed. There was no guilt in that moment, just need. An urgent hunger to feel something real. Yes, it was a cheating story in the making. But to us, it was an escape from the hollow spaces life had left behind. We didn't talk about David. We didn't talk about right or wrong. We just existed in the heat of the moment. But even as the night unfolded, part of me knew this wasn't just a physical act. It was emotional infidelity layered on top of the physical. And it hurt, not because of what we did, but because of what it revealed. That I could still feel this deeply. That Ryan could see me, desire me, touch the parts of me I thought were buried with David. It was both beautiful and terrifying. A forbidden confession that could never be unsaid. When it ended, we didn't speak. Just lay there, listening to our own breathing, too afraid to shatter the fragile silence. And in that quiet aftermath, reality began to creep in through the cracks. Questions, fears, consequences. The kind that don't just go away with morning light. And even though I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, I felt it coming. The weight of it all, pressing hard on our chests. Morning has a cruel way of exposing the things you try to hide in the dark. I woke up before Ryan, watching the soft light crawl across the floor like an unwanted truth. My heart wasn't racing, it was sinking. What we shared the night before wasn't just passion. It was a confession of cheating, written in skin and breath. And now, in the cold clarity of daylight, the guilt arrived like a tide I couldn't stop. I didn't regret feeling alive. I didn't regret the warmth, the connection, the intimacy. What I regretted was crossing a line I could never uncross. Infidelity doesn't always look like betrayal in the moment. It can feel like salvation. But once the silence settles, you realize just how far you've drifted from the person you thought you were. I had become someone I once judged. Someone with a story of infidelity they never planned to live. When Ryan woke, there was no drama, just silence, heavy and full of everything we didn't say. He looked at me with tenderness, but also with understanding. We both knew we couldn't continue. The bond we'd formed wasn't enough to justify the damage it could cause. It wasn't sustainable, not morally, not emotionally. And so, there were no accusations, no tears, just quiet acceptance that something beautiful had grown in the wrong soil. We hugged at the door, too long, too tight, and just like that, he was gone. I closed the door behind him, heart shattered in a whole new way. But even in that pain, I knew something had shifted in me. And what came next wasn't about love or lust. It was about truth and the price of crossing boundaries that were never meant to be touched. I sat alone that evening, the piano untouched, the wine glasses still in the sink. The silence wasn't haunting this time, it was sobering. I replayed every moment with Ryan, not with bitterness, but with an aching awareness. Infidelity doesn't always come wrapped in scandal or shouting matches. Sometimes it arrives softly, disguised as comfort. And that's what makes it so dangerous. It feels right until it isn't. Until you realize you betrayed yourself before anyone else. I thought about the woman I used to be, the faithful wife, the loyal widow, the woman who believed cheating stories only happened to others. But the truth is, none of us are immune. Vulnerability opens doors we swore we'd never walk through. Emotional cheating, physical betrayal, forbidden confessions, they don't happen in one grand moment. They unfold slowly, like fog creeping in while you're asleep. This wasn't just about Ryan. It was about the version of myself that allowed grief to blur the lines. I wanted to be loved. I wanted to be held. And maybe that desire made me selfish. But I also learned something most people never admit out loud. Sometimes, the deepest connection is the one you have to let go of. That walking away isn't weakness. It's the most courageous act of love there is. Especially when it's love you shouldn't have had. So I chose solitude again. But this time, not out of grief, out of clarity. I knew who I was now, flawed, human, but wiser. And as I closed the chapter with Ryan in my heart, I realized that some infidelity stories don't end with explosions. Some end with quiet reflection, and the hope that someday you'll find a connection that doesn't ask you to cross any lines at all. And now that you've heard it all, let me ask you something real. How many times have you ignored your own emotional needs just to uphold a version of yourself that no longer exists? How many silent betrayals have you lived? Emotional cheating you never dared to name, just because it didn't fit the script of right and wrong? The truth is, infidelity doesn't always come from lust. It often comes from neglect, from feeling invisible, from wanting to be seen, heard, desired. And if you've ever found yourself on that edge, staring at a boundary you swore you'd never cross, you're not alone. This was my story, but it could easily be yours, or someone close to you. So now I ask, what will you do with this truth? Will you keep pretending, or will you start having the uncomfortable conversations that actually lead to healing? Will you judge others, or begin to understand the messy, complex truth behind every cheating story? Every story of infidelity, every forbidden confession that lives in the quiet spaces of marriage. If this hit you somewhere deep, then don't leave without subscribing. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that speaks the truth nobody wants to say out loud. And leave a comment. I want to hear from you. Because together, we're not just telling stories, we're exposing the reality behind the silence.